Hello and good morning to you all.
Good
This is
morning, sir.
Thank you. This is another round of PAD 326. And our topic for today will be built around what public relations is about. And if you look at what we have been discussing in the last 2 to 3 classes, we have been working more on the internal structure, side by side, the external structure of how organizations are framed. In as much as we have looked at the theoretical underpinning of these various aspects of first the origin of administration and organization in themselves, and then the theoretical principles that have sought to explain various perspectives of what organizations are and how human beings have been the core of organizations discussions, ranging from the angle of productivity to the angle that takes care of the welfare of the individual in the course of the production arrangements. We have looked at how private organizations and public enterprises function and the motives behind them. And we have also looked at how leadership is framed within the confines of an organizational arrangement and how the government operates. Because a government is viewed as a larger organization. And then these various, be it public or private organizations, exist within the umbrella of this larger organization. So from time to time, we have made references to government as an institution, and then these various organizations that exist under the government as an institution. So we have looked at the leadership type that is vested in an individual. We have also looked at how there are advisory bodies that play specific roles in how information flows and how the chain of authority is carried out. We have looked at the hierarchical structure of how organizations are built, ranging from how the superiors operate with their subordinates, and how subordinates also communicate information to the superior. We have looked at Max Weber's principle of bureaucracy. So in all, it tends to relate with how organizations function internally and how they relate with their external environment. So in today's lecture, our emphasis is built around public relations. And it's not a big deal to understand what public relations is about. Like every individual has an idea of what public relations is built around. And in line with that also, we'll be looking at issues of propaganda, how to balance between public relations and propaganda, how to balance between public relations and publicity. We'll also be looking at organizations and the methods of how activities are carried out within an organization, the procedural steps, the laws and principles that regulate the conduct of affairs within an organization. So when you hear public relations, it is very simple. It tends to showcase how organizations relate internally and externally as well, how they balance between what they are built to achieve, that's the goals and principles, the objectives, side by side, how they are able to relate with the external environment, with the individuals or the customer base that they have. Like it is common knowledge that we hear of customer service in a lot of organizations. And the idea is built around the satisfactory delivery of the wants and needs of these various organizations. Sorry, let me share my screen with you so that you understand. So it is built around how effectively these organizations manage the conduct of their affairs with the external environment, how everybody is carried along, and how they are able to meet the yearnings and aspirations of these individuals. So that is what public relations is built about. Then the other angle that is closely related to public relations is the issue of publicity, which if you look at closely and you try to find a demarcating line between these two concepts, you will see that one has to do with communication on a larger scale as against this streamlined or narrowed way of relating with the external environment. So one makes use of, do I say the mass media more than the other? Even though they are closely related and sometimes used interchangeably, they simply connote the best possible means to relate with the external environment. So today, we are going to be looking at a lot of factors, how they correlate with internal functions of organizations side by side, how they balance the relationship with the external environment. So we'll be doing a lot of quick readings and quick summaries so that I saw on the platform somebody writing that they have another lecture by 11 o'clock, and the response was that God will help us. So I'll try to finish within 50 minutes so that you can have 10 minutes to prepare for the 11 o'clock lecture. So we say that the fundamental purpose of public relations is to establish a two-way flow of mutual understanding based on truth, knowledge, and full information. Public relations involve the deliberate, planned, and sustained effort to establish and maintain mutual understanding between an organization and its public. So it goes therefore to further buttress the point I was trying to make, that the idea of public relations is how to have a balance between what exists within the organization and how the external environment views the activities of the organization. Like when we look at other theories, although not within the confines of this course, but we must have heard of systems theory, where you get inputs from the external environment, and then the inputs are processed within the organization, and then the output comes in forms of policies of government or how the organizations relate or work on the inputs that they get from the external environment. So it's based on an idea of stability and creating a balance within how organizations function and how the internal environment perceives of the activities of this organization. So that is a function of public relations, and it helps in the stability of the organization. So therefore, the importance of cultivating contacts between the citizen and the administrators need hardly any emphasis, especially in the modern democratic states, where the sovereign power rests with the people. So the relevance of the environment cannot be overstated when one talks on issues of public relations and how organizations strive on the perspective or the perceived opinion of its external environment. So public relations, according to the Encyclopedia Americana, defines it as the act of analyzing, influencing, and interpreting a person, idea, group of businesses, so that that's in the aspect of the individual, or it will be recognized as serving the public interest and will benefit from doing so. So the idea is that first, the idea is to influence, to interpret, to give adequate information on a particular aspect or the particular function or the particular duties of an organization, or in terms of the services that such an organization renders first to the individual and to the external environment, and the benefits that they tend to derive, be it from an individual angle or of public interest. So it is about communication, it is about influencing positively, it's about interpreting the ideas through which a government or a business organization exists. According to MC Kami, public relations in government is the composite of all the primary and secondary contacts between the bureaucracy and the citizen, and all the interactions of influence and attitudes established in these countries. So, like I have said, and what this position is trying to further reiterate is premised on the fact that the whole idea of communication within the organization is to balance between how the organization is structured internally and how it relates with its external environment in the interest of all and sundry. So in line with that, other aspects that I've mentioned earlier that relates to this idea of public relations is the issue of publicity. To an extent, or taken to the extreme, is the issue of propaganda. Just that there are very little lines of demarcation between these various concepts. Public relations and publicity, the two terms, public relations and publicity, are very often confused with each other. Some governments designate their public relations officer as publicity officers. No doubt the two terms are so intimately intertwined that they are not two different functions, but two aspects of the same thing. The whole idea is built around communication and how the public receives the information that is churned out from the organization in the interest of both the organization and its external environment. According to J.H. Gruber, the difference between public relations and publicity lies in the technique of their approach. Publicity has been defined as the act of dealing with the people en masse, while public relations deals with the individual. You know, like I said earlier on, one has a narrower scope than the other. So public relations tend to have a narrower scope than publicity. So publicity has to do with the perspective of the generality of the masses of the people, that is the public in general, how they perceive of the information that is given from the angle of the organization, and how they also receive the feedbacks from the external environment to also shape policies and programs of be it the government or the organization themselves. So you can see that the whole idea is built around communication, just that one has a wider scope than the other, but they are all mostly interrelated and used interchangeably when one discusses issues of internal communications or internal mechanism of organization with its external environment. Like I said earlier on, is basically to create a balance so that if there is a negative publicity or a negative perception of an organizational activity from the public realm, through the instrumentality of public relations and publicity, you would get those information easily and either adjust or do things to suit how the public would accept such a policy generally. Same also, if a government or an organization has some aspects of their activities that needs to be reflected in the public domain or needs to be communicated effectively to the people, they use the instrument of public relations and publicity to communicate these ideas and equally measure the extent of their acceptability from the public domain. So it's basically about passing information both within and outside the organization. So public relations and propaganda is another aspect of communication as well. Propaganda is an aspect of communication. Same as public relations, same as publicity. It is just how the organization or the government relates with its external environment and the feedback that they get from the external environment in terms of shaping policies and programs or in terms of the actualization of the goals and objectives of the organization. So one important part of public relations, as we have seen above, is publicity. Often the term publicity is confused with propaganda. The important points of difference between the two are the following. The object of publicity is to disseminate information, while the object of propaganda is to influence conduct. Let me give an example of what propaganda is built around. The ability to communicate beyond the efficiency and effectiveness or the capacity an organization has, but done with the interest or with the sole purpose of changing the perception of how the external environment views such an organization. Brought to a very layman's understanding, propaganda is built around saying or acting in a manner that suggests that you have superiority or higher efficiency compared to your actual capacity. Take, for instance, you hear of semi-military organizations, or you hear of maybe the army saying that they can maybe run down 2-3 countries, like we know it in global politics today, the conflict between Iran and Israel. You hear Israel saying that they are going to inflict injury on Iran and what. So these are elements of propaganda. It might not really reflect the extent of the capacity and capability of such an organization. So propaganda tends to heighten the levels of efficiency that organization is perceived to have. But in real terms, it might not really conform with what they say. So it is more like an advanced or something built around an ego that does not reflect reality. Like I said earlier on, taken to the extreme, you now have propaganda. So it is communication taken to the extreme to show excess capacity when compared to actual capability. So the source of publicity is always known, while the source of propaganda is often veiled. That is, you cannot entirely measure the accuracy of propaganda. That is what this statement is trying to say. That in as much as it's an element of communication and very important in most cases when one wants to show excessive capabilities, that you cannot really trace the source of this propaganda. It is more like a hearsay kind of arrangement, or it is more like an information passed on to influence the perspective of certain categories of information. So public relations has no bad motive, while propaganda seeks to serve its own selfish ends by giving wrong information and distorted facts. It is a very viable aspect of communication, a very viable aspect of public relations. You make people feel you are very potent, that the organization is strong enough, that the government is strong enough, that the military is very powerful enough. But when you juxtapose that with the actual capacity of such an organization, you now find a loophole that it might not necessarily correlate with the information that is churned out. So it is basically to influence ideas. Sometimes it can be used to instill fear that, okay, if I am attacked, that the repercussion will be very heavy on you. Meanwhile, you might not necessarily have the power to even do anything much in that aspect. So propaganda is an element or an aspect of public relations that is taken to the extreme to show capability or capacity beyond the actual reality. So public relations officers cannot be allowed to indulge in propaganda. Remember when we said that the source of it is veiled, it is covered, it is shrouded in secrecy. Like you cannot entirely pinpoint a particular position that propaganda can be narrowed to. Sometimes you even have, like we know in social media, you have bloggers that will carry information that is not the real situation on ground. So sometimes they can use proxies to pass this kind of information across. So that is what Stephen is trying to say, that renowned or very well informed public relations officers are not allowed to indulge in propaganda, because when it is brought to the aspect of scrutiny and a gap is found that what you have said does not correlate with what is on ground, it becomes an issue. So most cases, proxies are used to pass this kind of information across. His job is publicity and not propaganda. The people must be supplied with kind facts. They should not be misled. So there is the element of being misled that is embedded in the angle of propaganda. So you can see clearly that public relations or publicity tend to have some elements of facts that can be verified. But propaganda, in most cases, is an ambiguous or a very bogus statement that is made that cannot be pinpointed to a single individual or a single source. So the idea is that information should not mislead the people, but propaganda has some elements of misleading people, most especially when what you claim to have does not correlate with the realities on ground. However, in war times, governments also may indulge in propaganda to counteract enemy propaganda and create low morale among the people and soldiers. This is like what I have said earlier on, that you find some militaries claiming that they have this, they have that, they have weapon of mass destruction, they have this, so many activities that is not in tandem with the reality on ground. So those are elements of propaganda, that maybe $1 can be brought to ₦1 and all that. Even though we have made appreciable progress, we still find that we have the government saying what and what that might not really be in conformity with the actual capacity and capability that is embedded in the system. So in line with that, there are elements of public relations. And we said, according to Millet, public relations consists of 4 elements: learning about people's desires and aspirations, advising the public, cultivating the satisfactory contact between the public and officials, informing the public about what government is doing. Like I said earlier on, the whole idea is built around how effectively an organization balances its internal structure side by side its external environment. So it is just a system to create adequate information, to create a balance, a satisfactory arrangement between an organization and its external environment, or between the employees of an organization side by side those that are outside the organization. So that is what these elements are basically talking about. The publicity function of the government of Nigeria has been given to the Ministry of Information, the National Reputation Agency. The ministry does this job through the following important agencies: Radio Nigeria, Federal Radio Corporation, the Press Information Bureau, Publication Division, Directorate of Advising and Visual Publicity. The whole idea here is that every organization, be it the government or private or public organization, they have various units or departments that carry out this function of relating the goals of the organization with its external environment, and also getting information from the external environment to shape policies of government or those of the organization. So there are various departments, there are various agencies, and the examples here listed are basically about how the government of the day or the government of Nigeria from successive administrations tend to carry out the activity of passing information to the public, communicating the goals and policies and programs of the government to its external environment. So those are some of the organizations here listed that exist within the confines of the government arrangement in terms of public relations. So there are also obstacles to public relations. The following obstacles are in the way of good public relations: the complexity of modern management. Let me explain that quickly. Take, for instance, what you see on the social media does not necessarily correlate with what you see sometimes in the mainstream media. So there's the tendency that, owing to improved information technology system, that the society has become very complex. And there is a tendency that what you find in some instances would not be the actual position on ground. So because of the complexity of modern day society, there is always the challenge that public relations has in terms of actual communication of information to the masses. The usual indifferent attitude of the general public. One aspect giving you an information that is not correct, and if you do not wait properly to get the real position of things, you tend to show a quick bias or a quick attitude that may not necessarily be the position of the government. And that is why in most cases, it can be used for public good, but can also be a catalyst for creating chaos in the system. So the lack of appreciation on the part of many public officials of the importance of their responsibility in the matter of public relations. So sometimes people rely too much on the information that is premised on hearsay, and those that are charged with the duties and the responsibility to give adequate information might not necessarily do their functions or their jobs effectively because they just assume that it will be in the public domain. And at that level, people can be misled. Opinions can be formed that will not necessarily be a reflection of the realities on ground. The lack of objective indices to measure the effectiveness of the methods used. Like I said earlier on, sometimes you hear the news, the mainstream news saying something, and then the social media saying a different thing. So there's the tendency that the measure used might not be effective enough, and that can result to the abuse of the system. The limited funds available for public relations activities and the consequent necessity of foregoing professional and technical assistance. We all know that the issue of funding sometimes can tend to reduce the extent of the potency that ordinarily should exist within a department or amongst the people that are professional enough to carry out such activities. So they tend to rely on the cheapest possible means of passing information across, which is very dangerous and can lead to people being misled. The difficulty of maintaining impartiality also is another major challenge. Like, objectivity is a guiding principle when one talks about issues of administration. Remember in the last class or the last two classes, we talked about impartiality as an aspect of bureaucracy as opined by Max Weber. It also relates to the issue of information given to the public, that you should not be biased in what you say. You should be objective as much as possible so that everybody is carried along and the actual position is known. But public relations tend to sometimes suffer these kinds of impartiality, partiality, I suppose, suffers this kind of partiality, and then sometimes is subjected to some measure of abuses because of the bias, because of the affiliations, or because of the alignment that some persons may have towards the system. Like I was reading on Twitter this morning, people discussing various aspects of the Naira appreciation. Some of the view that it is crippling some businesses that have bought goods when the dollar was high. And then some other persons are arguing from the aspect of the poor and the less privileged, particularly in a dependent economy as Nigeria, that everything comes from the outside environment, and that the Naira gaining some levels of appreciation is in the interest of the populace. So you find this kind of biases here and there. The people in government will tell you that it is for good. Those in the private sector, in the business angle, will tell you that their businesses are suffering. So you must be able to balance the information you give out and then weigh the levels of benefit that is accrued to such an information. So in a general scheme of things, the interest of the public must form the core of whatever information is given out. and how the environment views it as well. So the difficulty of persuading the public that public relations devices are not necessarily propaganda, the tendency to interpret all government policies as propaganda. So all these things are aspects of how information flows from, be it an organization or the government in general. Remember, the government also is formed as an organization. It has the structure of an organization. So you should not be confused when you see government being brought into the discussion at regular intervals. So government is a larger organization and have these various subordinates functioning within it as smaller organizations. So the whole idea is built on the stability of the system. Public employees organization, this is also another aspect. It goes without saying that strength lies in the organization. This is specifically true for those who earn their living by providing services under a private or state organization. Employees' union has become a vital part of personnel organization. It is being increasingly realized that if the employees do not organize themselves into an association, it will be difficult for them to get better working conditions and improve their lot thereby. This is also in line with the internal structuralization of how organizations carry out their functions and how these functions work in the interest of both the employees and its external environment. So this particular discussion now is focused on how associations and how unions are formed, both in the interest of the organization and how to relate that with this external environment. Like we know, we are here of NLC, Nigerian Labour Congress, TUC, and so many other unions that not only pursue the interest of their members, but also pursue the interest of the generality of the populace as well. So all these are aspects of communication within an organization. Professional associations versus unions. Public employees associations are of two types: professional associations and trade unions. Professional associations, these are those organizations which bring members of the same profession together for the exchange of information and experience and for the advancement of their profession. These associations are, broadly speaking, formed by the higher categories of government employees, such as administrative, executive, and professional officials and scientists. All these are built around rhetorics. The whole idea is to show that organizations have unions, and these unions sometimes pursue the interest of their workers, the interest of their members, and also taking to certain levels, they also pursue the interest of the public. So it is also built around the stability of the system. So beyond the angle of information and communication alone, there is also the aspect of pursuing the interest of those that are within the organization and those that have similar attributes that exist within the external environment as well. Take, for instance, the Nigerian Labour Congress. When one hears that, you would quickly think of the union within the government, but they tend to pursue their objectives in the interest of the generality of the people, in the interest of Nigerians as a whole. So sometimes when you hear of these organizations and trade unions or associations that exist, it is particularly about how to balance the system. So trade unions, on the other hand, are generally formed by the employees of subordinate public services. Their avowed objective is to seek to improve the wages and other conditions of service of their members. If their demands are not considered to, they do not hesitate to resort to strike action. Like we know of a very current situation that public servants in Nigeria are demanding for a pay rise that is improved or increased minimum wage. So it's also a function of stability of the system. Already there are policies from the government that have been communicated to the mass of the people that, okay, you must adjust because subsidy has been removed from one or two angles, and then this is to encourage growth in the economy, to have more funds, and to inject those funds into providing further services to the government. So now these unions are now coming out to say, okay, it is beyond you having money to run your government. How about at the individual level? How would the individual cope with a very reduced welfare package under the system? So you see that there is always the struggle for balance between how this organization operates, the unions that exist within them, and the element of public relations and the aspect of communication that takes place internally and externally as well. Objectives of association. Their main objectives are to promote personal acquaintance among individuals with common interests and problems. The aspect of the common acquaintance is to get to know your members more and to pursue the interest of your members or solve the challenges they are faced with in the event of a problem. To promote research in the profession by organizing periodic conference for the exchange of ideas and experience so that best ideas may be selected and applied in order to improve efficiency of administration. These are self-explanatory statements. That's the whole idea, is to educate members, to see ideas that members hold, the views that they have concerning certain policies and programs of government. So this angle is premised on the aspect of the learning systems that can take place within these associations and within these unions, to give their suggestions for reform and improvement, what they think of the government or what they think of the education, and how best they can advise or improve the delivery of services or in terms of production, the case may be. To issue literature for the spread of the latest information relating to their field, that is, to share ideas of what is obtainable within other undertakings or other organizations. Public employees, the following are the various objectives of the union. To exact, remember, we are trying to balance between trade unions, employees associations, trade unions, and employees union. To exert pressure on the authorities that the merit rule should be adopted, and under no circumstance should the spoils system be a substitute for the merit principle. This indirectly helps in effective efficiency and economy of administration. In the last class, I think, we looked at the issue of people having advantages over others within the system, or people using their affinity with the positions of authority to gain unnecessary advantages over those that must have grown through the ranks and through rigorous training and exercises to according to where they are. And we say that the merit system provides a level playing ground for everybody to try. That is, it guarantees competition that is favorable to all and reflects professionalism and expertise, and that the spoil system tends to show an abuse of the system because people that are less qualified can be brought to become superiors in an organization. So what this is saying is that this union sometimes puts in measures to check the abuses that can come from the angle of foisting some officials or employees or principals of government or the organization to the detriment of those that have put in their best within the system. So these authorities or these unions or associations come as a way to check abuses within the system, to strive for the clarification of service on the basis of the kind of work to be done by the incumbent of a particular office. If you look at this statement closely, it's still in line with ensuring that specialization and efficiency is measured within the system. To emphasize that compensation for the work should be adjusted with the nature of the work in terms of, say, maybe remuneration, salary, or as the case may be, how best to show a standard that conforms with the benefits that should accrue to those who carry out this duty. To stress that the minimum law wage should be strictly followed. Like we know it in Nigeria, these unions emphasize an upward review like every 5 years. So as it stands, I think with what is on ground, this particular year should experience an upward review of minimum wage, salaries, and all that. To see that the service records are properly maintained and the promotions are made mainly on that basis. Like we have heard of in Nigeria, we have heard of special promotions, particularly in the paramilitary, that some persons or your contemporaries can assume higher positions of authority on some very flimsy excuses. So what these unions do is that does not happen. Proper records are kept so that people can only gain positions of superiority on the premise of examinations written or trainings that they are exposed to, and not on the basis that are related to the spoil system. That somebody can be brought on recognition to become your superior, or on a special arrangement, or by virtue of knowing maybe people in positions of authority. So these unions guide against those kind of abuses that can happen in organizations. To insist on the adoption of a proper retirement plan so that the retired man does not feel frustrated after retirement. We hear of pension boards, contributory pension schemes, and all that. So these unions ensure that beyond your years of service with the system, you have something to fall back to that would continue to guide you for as long as necessary. So these organizations ensure, these unions that exist within organizations ensure that such is adequately guided and protected under the law. To bring pressure to bear on the government for improvement of pay and conditions of service, to provide a forum for the employee for exchange of ideas and experience, to foster the growth of the spirit of cooperation and group consciousness among the members. So all this is self-explanatory and still boils down to the argument we are trying to make, that the emphasis is on improved working conditions, improved system delivery, improved feedbacks from the external environment as well. So these unions play a very vital role guaranteeing stability of the system. Advantage of the union. Unions create a spirit of cooperation in service. They build up the morale of the employees as they feel strengthened collective capacity. They prevent abuses on the part of government, directing heads and safeguarding the merit system. They develop a sense of participation in personnel management through the unions. So I believe all these are self-explanatory when you read through them. It is still in line with all we are saying, that it is about a balanced arrangement in the system so that nobody feels shortchanged, nobody feels not being involved or not carried along as the case may be. So in furtherance of the above discussion, it is pertinent to note that the participation of federal employees in the formulation and implementation of employee policies and procedures affecting them contributes to the effective conduct of public businesses. So when the interest of the employees are protected, side by side the interest of the public, you find a smooth and effective system where all the policies of government or the policies of organizations are guaranteed to have a free flow, unlike aspects where they are clogs, they become clogs in the wheel of progress. So when they are used negatively, it becomes an issue. So this participation should include consultation by responsible officials with the representatives of the employees and federal employees of the institutions and all that. So there's also the angle of having the internal system or the mechanism to check how what is communicated externally is received and how they are measured from the perspective of the acceptability that the external environment gives to it. So beyond the internal working system, there's also the external balance that must be guaranteed. In line with that, there are administrative procedures. Administration today is not a matter of personal whims and prejudices. It is required to follow a definite set of rules and a specific procedure, particularly when government has to be a government by laws and not by whims and caprices of the individuals. So what this is saying is that there should be a standard of operation. There should be laws or procedures for regulation that must be put in place. So it is not based on the personal feelings or the biases that people exhibit within the system. It should not be on the premise of anybody comes and does anything and they cannot be held accountable. So it is more like strengthening the institutions to work rather than having strong individuals that can influence the system. Definition of procedure. Professor Waldo defines procedure as the prescribed or customary way of working together with the conduct of an organization's business. Evidently, procedure comprises three elements. Remember, like I said earlier on, administrative procedure, having a standard that everybody must conform to, having a body of law and principles that guides the conduct of affairs, both internally and externally, because any arrangement that does not have the element of a legal backing, it can be subjected to abuses. So when you have laws stipulating clearly what should be followed, the procedure and patterns that should be strictly adhered to, you have a smooth arrangement because everybody will operate within the ambit of the law. And where there are infractions, one can easily call to question such an arrangement and redress and be sought. So first is repetition of transaction in a prescribed or customary fashion. So there is this precedence that is set when there are procedures. People can make references to such arrangements that, okay, I am seeking redress on the premise of it happened in the case of A, B, and C. So there's always a standard that must be followed. Coordination of various efforts into a large whole. Keeping up organization in operation and attaining its goals. Types of procedure. Administrative procedure may be classified as written or unwritten, issued centrally or by field offices, That is institutional procedures and working procedures. So if you look at the whole arrangement and further relate it with when we discussed issues of centralization and decentralization, you will now see that beyond the angle of having these field offices or central offices, there's the aspect of adhering to the procedures that exist within how the system is structured. Like we know, we have heard of written and unwritten constitution, written rules and unwritten rules. But the general idea is built around the fact that there must be a standard that everybody must work towards and must conform to when one talks on issues of administration or issues of public relations or issues of how the external environment relates with the system and all that. There must be a procedure to be adhered to strictly. So in line with that, we have institutional procedures. Institutional procedures pertain to staff, housekeeping services, or auxiliary functions. Such procedures are prescribed by the statute, though they vary considerably from agency to agency. The institutional procedure covers mail and communications, meeting and conferences, travels, internal reporting, preparation, issuance and distribution of documents, space, library services, files, records, clerical services, procurement, clearance and review, budgetary and fiscal administration, and all aspects of personnel administration. So this is basically the internal arrangement, the internal working system. And remember, in as much as when approached from a holistic perspective, there are rules. Like looked at from the government angle now, there is the constitution that guides the conduct of affairs, both at the individual level or organizations and all that. So this narrowed to an organization now, it varies from one organization to another, particularly on the premise of the functions that these organizations are established to carry out. So in as much as there are similarities in the structural arrangement of these procedures and patterns that should be followed, in some organizations, we find differences that exist in how these internal workings are conducted. So in line with that also, there is the working procedure. Procedure meant for accomplishing an agency's particular objectives are of two types. These, those publicly issued and those not publicly issued. Publicly issued procedures constitute a body of ground rules for the agency and any individual affected by the statute. They specify the agency's sense of the procedural requirements of the law and also its conception of what is contrary, fair, and expedient where the law is not explicit. What the statement is trying to say is how the organization functions with its internal environment and relates with individuals that are outside the internal structure of the organization. I remember, like we made mention earlier on, that there are written and unwritten rules. So sometimes when there's the need to seek the redress where the laws are not explicitly stated, it therefore means that some of this unwritten aspect now comes to play. So defects of procedure system. The following are the main defects of procedure system. First, red tapeism. We heard that when we were discussing Max Weber's idea of bureaucracy. It simply connotes the extent of the delay that can be found within the system. Overemphasis on precedent, that is making reference to past ideas that may not be in tandem with modern reality or the complexity of the modern day structure of administration. Imagine when you have to make reference to issues that happened 20, 30, 50 years ago, and now trying to relate or to replicate what happened in those periods with modern day reality. It therefore means that there is an excessive adherence to previous aspects that may not necessarily reflect modern day reality. Too cumbersome and delaying is also another aspect of following these procedures excessively. So beyond that also, there's the issue of O&M, organization and methods. This is basically about how to monitor, how to ensure strict adherence and compliance to the internal working system of an organization. O&M could be seen as magic devices to make administration efficient and economical. In fact, when the level of efficiency in administration sinks low, entailing public outcry, officers and commissions are appointed to examine the causes of deterioration of administration. That is having a body of persons or departments that guides how the public views a particular arrangement and to ensure that there is strict adherence to these procedures or to how the organization is structured to carry out its functions. In the restricted sense, it means organization and method. In this sense, it deals with the organization of public bodies and their office procedures in order to effect efficiency and improvement in both. Efficiency in the context of O&M, O&M work signifies elimination of duplication, waste, and delay by reshaping the organization and by simplification and acceleration of procedures. So by adhering to the principles of evaluation, that is the duties that they carry out under this O&M, is basically those of evaluation, those of monitoring, to guide against duplicity, to guide against abuses, to ensure efficiency and speedy delivery of services or how the organization is to function, to ensure that there are no delays, to ensure that there are no abuses. So there is always this element of methods and monitoring and evaluation that can take place under this arrangement. So the function of O&M, as already said, the O&M office stands for assisting line officials for effective improvement in organizational management. The following are its main functions. So from this statement alone, you already have an idea of what O&M does with an organization. Improvement of services, or ensuring that there's compliance to standards and rules within the organization. So in line with that, the duties of the O&M revolves around research, investigation, training, information, publication, and so many other activities that boils down to guaranteeing efficiency and improvement within the system. There are advantages and disadvantages of O&M. O&M is an endeavor to find out better ways of doing things. It may be described as organized common sense, but since common sense is not common, efficiency experts will be required to organize it. The main advantages of O&M are the following: a device to improve administration. O&M provides machinery to improve administration, as it typically reviews the organization of its various branches and methods of work followed herein. Such a review is of dire necessity even in the best organized offices. It's self-explanatory. It's all about improvement of how the functions that can be found or the administrative elements of organization can best be put to practice. So it is simply all about evaluation, monitoring, strict adherence to principles that will guide an effective system. Structure of government office and its procedure made adaptable. Since it makes provision for the machinery to review government organization methods, it keeps the structure of government office and procedure adopted by it up to date. Reservoir of experience. As the O&M unit function as center of management research, experience is accumulated. This wealth of experience proves conducive to offices and institutions with regard to problems pertaining to organizations and methods. So all these are things that if you think about them critically and balance them with everyday activity that you come in contact with, you would find that these things are very easy to understand and they are basically self-explanatory. In the aspects of disadvantages, though O&M is of immense use, it is not safe from the perennial shafts of the critics. The following are its disadvantages. It becomes a fault finder. You know, when you empower people to evaluate and monitor the activities of others, and then to instill compliance, to instill measures that will guarantee efficiency and improvement in the system, there's the tendency of abuse that those people now begin to sometimes use those powers or the instrumentality of those offices to victimize other persons or even become an avenue for abuses within the system. So no matter how well some organizations can function or individuals within the organization carry out their functions, you can now find an O&M official that will come and then criticize everything you have done or find it not to be in line with what the ordinary principle should be. So it is a subject that is subjected to abuses. It can degenerate into finding unnecessary faults or abusing the internal policing powers that such O&M official is charged with. In line with that, they become usurpers of line function. So because of the fact that they are to monitor strict adherence to the principles and practices on ground, they tend to now take over the function of people that are ordinarily charged with the powers to carry out this function. So because of their roles and how important they are, they've now become sometimes elements of taking over the function of others. The O&M outstay their role as advisors. they encroach upon the powers of administrators and managers. Instead of winning confidence of the head of the department, they pose as potential rival. So some of these are the challenges associated with this O&M activity. So the aura of technicality is not avoided. The O&M men do not avoid aura of technicality because the more technical their work becomes, the farther they drift from the operational heads. So people tend to avoid them a lot because, like I said, if used negatively, it becomes an object of abuse within the system. So in summary, and by way of conclusion as well, the authorities in public administration are of the view that O&M units regulation is working quite satisfactorily. However, there's always a scope for that improvement. So I don't know how many minutes we have left. Let me check. But at this point, we are now free to make our contributions, ask our questions, and whatever idea you feel will help improve the class. So can you all hear me? And is the lecture okay by your own standard?
Yes, we are hearing you.
Okay, so do you have questions to ask or contributions to make? I think we have finished within the 50 minutes I said we'll spend. I think by my own time is 51 minutes. So within the next 8 to 9 minutes, we can ask our questions and make contributions. Okay, Bola, I can hear you.
Okay. My question is, we talk about the Public Employee Association, where we have professional association and trade union. Then the professional association, it entails the head of the unit of the administrative and all that. But I want to ask, I'm kind of confused. Where can we categorize the other professional body like NSC, CORE, and the likes?
There are also professional bodies with people that carry out specialized functions. Like you mentioned, CORE, it's a professional body for engineers.
Yes.
So a professional maybe from the health angle cannot fit into the objectives of CORE. So they are all bodies that pursue the interests of their individuals. Like we have had issues of building collapses, and CORE was dragged into the arrangement to evaluate the activities of their engineers. How come they are not having engineers that can carry out functions that would protect the public? So they are professional bodies.
So that
but
means
okay, I can hear you.
So that means that professional body of law is also part of this professional association body, sir.
Yes, okay. Yes. So any other question, any other contribution? Esther, I can see Esther Matilda. I'm calling you out because you're showing your face on the platform. Do you have any question, any contribution, or the lecture is well understood and you will read on your own and ask your question on the WhatsApp platform? Like I know in most cases with students, you always prefer to have your quiet time, then ask the questions much later, and which this platform has offered you all that. So you can ask your questions, WhatsApp platform, you can ask your questions next class. So whenever you want to make contributions or ask questions, the platform is there for you. Any other person, any other contribution?
Yes, sir. I have a question.
Okay. Francesca.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good morning, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, first of all, I appreciate the topic of today. I want to know, O&M, is it an abbreviation or is that just a name to identify a group of people, something like that? I want to know.
O&M?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Within the context of this work, it's an abbreviation. And like I said, it simply means organization and methods. That there are people that sometimes are formed into departments that their duty is to carry out evaluatory functions and suggest ways of improving the administrative components that exist within an organization. It's just like now, having let's say our WhatsApp platform now the admin there regulating what can be posted, or even bringing people and informing people about the lecture, creating the platform for people to gain the best out of this class. So it's a function of organization and the method, and ensuring that everybody complies to strict adherence. That is the whole idea that the WhatsApp group is formed around. Like, you cannot have people insulting each other on that platform. The platform is basically for lecture. So the O&M function there is to ensure that there is strict compliance and effective service. Like, if you're not okay with this lecture now, you can maybe discuss with your admin person or other students within the platform, and then you can come up with possible suggestions on how to improve the system or to ensure that I serve you better. So it's just an idea that is built into departments and individuals within this organization to ensure compliance, to monitor effectiveness, improve service delivery, and host of other functions. Yeah. So we are clear on that.
Okay.
Francisca, are you there?
Yes, sir. I'm with you, sir.
This class, so that it will not be that God will help us, like people have said.
My network.
Okay, so we'll be ending the class here so that you have some few minutes to prepare for the next class. So I am available on the WhatsApp platform, or you can refer to Bola. Okay, if you have any questions, any suggestions, or anything you want to say.
Okay, sir.
All right, so thank you and enjoy the rest of the day. Bola, thank you for assisting us.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.